Welcome to Aspen Ignites, Conversations to Build a Better World, a series from the Aspen Institute that brings together thoughtful people with diverse backgrounds and points of view. In this episode, author and host of NPR's All Things Considered, Mary Louise Kelly, joined Aspen Institute President and CEO Dan Porterfield to talk about the power of dialogue.
Dan, welcome, although I feel like you should be welcoming me since we're here at the Aspen Institute, but it is such a pleasure to see you.
Likewise.
Beautiful morning, and to get to have a dialogue about dialogue. So thanks for taking a few minutes.
Love it. Thank you. And of course, you've been a regular presence at Aspen convenings and conducted wonderful interviews on stage and as a part of your work at NPR. So thank you for being with us.
Well, I feel like I have learned actually a lot about how to interview people and the difference between that and having a conversation, which is subtle but real. Yeah. So you and I are going to have a conversation about having a conversation and about the importance of dialogue. And I'll just dive in right there, because my sense is that unlike a lot of institutions where dialogue is a means to an end, a tool to get your work done, it is the work here at the Aspen Institute. How do you think about dialogue?
That's very thoughtful. Dialogue changes the interlocutors. And so that's one of the benefits of it, is that by engaging with one another, we learn, grow, change, and become just a little bit different because of that engagement. We organize dialogues in a wide array of ways. We have our on-stage dialogues. We have our leadership programs where people dialogue for 2 years together. We have collective problem solving that we do in communities where we bring people together to set the table for their dialogue. The fundamental idea, though, is that we exist in reciprocal relationships with one another. Whether we know it or not, we do. And so how can we enhance those relationships by engaging?
Yeah. So a couple of points to draw you out on or challenge you on. One is, I talk to some people who look at my work and say, dialogue is great, but what these times demand is action. Yeah. More action, less talk. Yeah. How do you think about that here?
I think that dialogue it can actually be thought of as a form of action, that bringing people together to share their ideas and to learn and grow together has a transformational effect. Sometimes 1 + 1 = 5, what people come up with together. So I do think that first. But then secondly, a good dialogue can also lead people to make commitments or to take steps that they wouldn't have taken because they wouldn't have known to or thought to before they engaged with another. I think that a really excellent dialogue can facilitate understanding, for sure, but also can facilitate breakthrough, creativity, and a new idea. And so we try to provide the environment where that can happen. Something that we think about is, well, are you able, if you're facilitating dialogue, to also have a position on what those in dialogue are talking about? Here we exercise restraint. We try to build dialogues that bring together people from different points of view, from different backgrounds and walks of life. And we try not to have our own view that we bring into that dialogue. It's not always easy, because there sometimes are questions about the events of the day.
Yeah, and you're human, and you have a point of view and a perspective that you're walking around with.
I learned as a college teacher how to think about that, for me anyway, which was that I was teaching every student in my class, whatever their perspectives and backgrounds were. And so my responsibility was to be open and inclusive and to give every single student the feeling of belonging. And so that my aim was their flourishing, if you will. And so always really, I tried to keep my own personal views to myself while we were working on, in my classes, topics like human rights and how to respond to newcomers to the country and how to address criminal justice issues. The poet Keats called this negative capability, where you could hold one view and at the same time be able to hold the exact opposite view and have them in balance with one another. And that's, I think, our role as an institution, is not to be the advocates, but to be the enablers. Other institutions have a role to be the advocates.
One follow-up, because we're talking at an abstract, kind of high level. Give me an example that makes this real from a recent dialogue that the Institute's convened or been involved with.
So a couple fast. One is we just convened a group of community college presidents here for 4 days to work on how each of their institutions can facilitate rapidly the propelling their graduates into family-sustaining jobs. And so in that case, the dialogue is about practitioners with these extraordinarily important institutions they lead, sitting together so that they can workshop, well, how do you do that? How do you do that? How do we handle this so that it's most effective? But another kind of dialogue that we hosted recently was with a whole host of political and public health leaders from multiple perspectives talking about the issue of gun violence. And together, off the record, in a workshop mode, saying, what are your views about this? And how do the people that you serve or represent think about this? And how do you think about this? And where could there be possibly a common ground that would lead to maybe more understanding and some solutions? It was really,
Were you hearing really contradictory views?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I bet on that issue of
so, and that meeting is held, off the record in a setting where people can let down their guard and really talk to each other. So that's a second way of doing dialogue in the real world. And then another way that I really admire a lot is that at something like the Aspen Ideas Festival, we will work to construct panels that allow multiple points of view to be aired about speech and expression, about reproductive rights and change of the national laws around abortion, around efforts to address systemic poverty, how to think about systemic racism or sexism. These topics have multiple points of view. When we build a public forum, we bring in we hope speakers from all perspectives. And then the point, though, is for the audience to be a part of the dialogue through the questions they ask and through the conversations they have with each other afterwards and with the speakers. So dialogue takes a lot of forms. Now, you're one of the great journalists in the country, and you've thought a lot about how to facilitate dialogue, and both as somebody who interviews and creates stories, but also the role of the media in the country in facilitating dialogue. How do you ready yourself to be able to conduct a really great interview?
Yeah. So it totally depends on the interview. I'm a believer that a great interview doesn't mean I'm just nodding and letting everything you say pass by unchallenged. I need to be ready to stop you and fact check you and push you. And hopefully that's going to allow the audience, the listeners, the readers, to have a deeper understanding of what you believe and why you believe what you believe and what evidence you can marshal to support your position. Get a sense of how deeply you've thought about something, get a sense of how you deal with those competing contradictory ideas, because there's almost no issue on the planet in which one side is 100% right and the other has nothing to offer, or in which there are only two sides, So you're trying to dig a little bit into there. When I'm interviewing ordinary people who often are living through some extraordinary event, if you've come on, my show to talk to me about it, it's listening with as open a mind and open heart as I can to get a sense of what animates you, what has happened on what may be an incredibly painful day, week, year in your life. When I'm interviewing a newsmaker, I try to go through and see, everything you've said on an issue. And I will usually walk into a newsmaker interview with just 2, max 3 questions.
Yeah.
That's it. Because that's all we're going to have time to get to, because each of those is going to require me coming back and saying, but what about this?
Yeah.
How do you square that with what you said last year? How do you square that with what this other person in your party is saying? How do you square that with this fact, data, statistic, poll? So for each question I ask, there's almost a choose your own adventure path. They could go 5 or 6 directions, and I want to be ready to keep knocking us back. It's almost like a bowling ball going down and you're trying to figure out, how do I keep it from guttering? The gutter rails are going up, and I'm keeping you just so that we're moving straight ahead.
Now, I read this great book called On Dialogue recently, and the author made the point that if the table isn't inclusively set, if critical perspectives are kept from the table, that it actually isn't a genuine dialogue.
Yeah.
Now, of course, you can't have every perspective at every conversation, so it has to take place over time. Does a news organization consistently draw in multiple perspectives?
Yeah.
And it's something that, I mean, NPR really works at that. But with the erosion of local media in so many places in the country, it sometimes does feel as if the media is not drawing out as many, as a whole, is not drawing out as many voices as it did in earlier eras.
Yeah. I will say in our newsroom, there's a concerted effort to be drawing on voices that you have not heard before.
You're the number one.
We're trying.
Yeah.
We're trying our
Yeah.
best. We're not perfect at it every single day. Part of it, I think it's signaling at the beginning of the conversation, through the conversation, where we're going, why we're doing this. I find, yes, I'll interview somebody, you'd mentioned gun violence, somebody who is totally pro-gun rights, and that will get a lot of people listening riled up. And then, because they don't know that the next day we're interviewing someone with a very different view on this, who is adamantly for more gun restrictions. But if I say in the intro, this is one of many voices. We're talking to people all over the spectrum, all over the country, with, coming at this from their communities, from Congress, all over. Here's the voice we're listening to right now, respectfully, with some challenging questions. And then if at the end I say again, and tomorrow we're going to have this voice, people are much more inclined to listen with an open mind, knowing, okay, like, I get that in this 5 minutes, I'm not hearing every perspective on the planet, but over time, that's where we're trying to head.
Yeah. In our leadership development work that we do, which is one of the big strands of the Aspen Institute's efforts, we probably have 20 different leadership programs. We use a model of text-based dialogue where we gather a group of, say, 20 who are committing to be there for each other for a year or 2 years of sustained work. The purpose of the work is to go deeper in their own personal values in a context of sharing those ideas with others. So you read a text, talk to each other about what that text means, and then reflect on what does that conversation and the text mean to you. It's like a three-way dialogue with Plato or Martin Luther King, with your partner, and then with yourself.
Yeah.
And that dialogue of self with self, is something that I think our culture can facilitate still more. But when in your work, you bring these great ideas out, these important topics, these voices that people aren't hearing. And as people engage with what you've created, the culture you've created, they then have the chance to go deeper in their own thoughts.
Yeah.
Maybe looking in the mirror in the morning.
Well, I often think about this as well. In my work, I'm interviewing someone. It's just the two of us. I know that a few million people are listening.
Yeah.
But I can't see them and they're not part of the conversation. Some of the events you're convening are utterly different in that there's two people talking or more if it's a panel on stage, but then there's the whole audience and how it resonates with them and the questions they bring to it and how you're pitching it. While I'm here, I'll be doing a kind of high-level panel about the future of energy security and geopolitics. That gets real wonky real fast.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out, how do you have a conversation like this? How do you have a dialogue where the people who are experts in this, who have run the oil ministry in their country, will take something away, and also someone who's curious, maybe at the level of, should I buy another gas guzzler, or is it time to switch to an EV? Like, that's where they are in this conversation, but we all have something to bring to it. And I love that about the work that the Institute does.
Me too.
There's space for all of us in here.
Yeah. The one of the things that I've loved thinking about over the years, I come out of higher education, is how some texts themselves actually contain the perspectives of many. And that not every text does that. But the idea, which was, believe it or not, first advanced by a Russian literary theorist whose name was Bakhtin, was that there are certain ways of seeing the world that are so open that the speaker or writer contains within what they say all these different strands of dialogue that they don't even know they're conveying because they just see the world inclusively. And sometimes the way they see the world brings those multiple perspectives, maybe a perspective of sort of like orthodoxy with a perspective of subversion, and brings them together into contact. And then one of the things I love about the NPR perspective is you go find people that are not embedded in a single dialogue, but are containing within them all these dialogues. How do you think about that? Is what I just said highly theoretical and great for a campus to be thinking about, but impractical in the world of journalism?
It's all of the above.
Yeah.
I think I will just build on that by saying so much of what I do is I have a 2-hour news program every day. That sounds really long.
Yeah.
But we're trying to fit in everything happening in the nation and the world. So the conversations become tight, focused, compressed. Here, the ability to spread out,
Yeah.
to expand. Like this, I don't have to land some of the conversations I'll be having with Aspen in any sharp, focused way by a particular clock. I can sleep on it. I can come back out, which leads me to the last thing I want to put to you. It feels remiss on this glorious morning, sitting talking to you, not to nod to that the spaces where we have these conversations matter.
Yeah.
In terms of our hearts and our minds being open to it. Before I came to talk to you, before I even got my coffee this morning, I went and did sunrise yoga on the lawn, and the instructor, who was terrific, instructed us to step off the mat and just dig our toes into the grass and spread our feet out and get big. And I nearly choked up. It was so beautiful. The sun coming down and my feet in the grass. I felt like a little kid. And it's just so opened up my heart to all of the conversations that we have as part of this community and as part of the Institute. We're very lucky.
Thank you, Mary Louise. There's a wisdom in the way this place was created 75 years ago in a mountain community which was very sleepy and only had a few thousand people living.
Yeah.
But the idea was that by bringing people together in a place where they could align their mind, their body, their senses, their spirit, and maybe their sense of citizenship, that all of those things could come together and provide an openness that would then allow for new ideas and new thoughts, new possibilities. There's other traditions that have had this same insight. Some religious traditions have said that by helping people create a feeling of awe before a creator,
Such
it
a
would
good
then
word.
open them up to insights that the everyday life doesn't make easy to have, those moments of clarity.
Yeah.
And that's something we're trying to achieve here in Aspen, but actually anywhere where Aspen is putting on a program. On Native American reservations, in the boardrooms of companies when we gather up for that kind of conversation, in our work in Ukraine or in India or Mexico, how can we create the environment that opens people up to each other and ultimately to themselves? Sounds like you had that experience this morning.
I have.
Yeah.
Here's to awe.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.